Hi, Supercon. I'm the last talk. Hello. Thank you for sticking around to the end. By the way, you may notice that there are open captions in the bottom here. The open captions are not done by Whisper AI. They're done by an advanced neural network. Her name is Amanda. She's sitting on the other end of a Zoom call. There is a human on a stenography keyboard who is trying to keep up with my verbal diarrhea. This X1Plus, a tour of shenanigans. This was originally titled a sort of unusual custom firmware. And we're going to get increasingly unusual as we go. But first, I have a confession to make. This started life... Oh, I have one of these guys. Nice. This started life structured as 3 talks. And maybe it deserved to be 3 talks. And I was going to try and make it 1 talk. And Zach Friedman, I don't know, the Zach Friedman quote that I keep coming back to is 80 4K 60 Ultra HD. And that's definitely what happened here. And so that clearly barely happened. And so I'm going to start off with just a little bit of context, and then I'm going to give you 3 talks that I thought were going to be an hour condensed into 40 minutes. Okay. That thing over there is a Bamboo Lab X1 Carbon. It's a 3D printer that was released in 2022. FDM, which means it's the kind of printer that has, it's a robot hot glue gun. It spits out plastic rather than the hazmat factory that is the resin printers, rather than the sintering things. Just spits out molten plastic. It was about $1,600 then. It's about $1,200 now, and that includes the material changer guy. And it has basically one market-leading differentiating feature as a 3D printer, which is that it does not suck ass. Fast? What defines that? And to answer the question of what defines it being a decent 3D printer, I want to basically provide a little bit of context as to what makes a bad 3D printer. These are all well-known and tried and true. This is a checklist of how to make a bad 3D printer. You make bed leveling finicky. This is like the Ender thing, where you have to you get it out of the box and you have to shim your own bed. Some printers have a 15-point bed leveling system. Any mechanical engineers who can tell me how many points constrain a plane? 3 points constrain a plane. 15 points is over-constrained. Bad defaults, outgoing quality control that doesn't exist, revisions with different bugs. The Creality K1, somebody's like, oh yeah, it's great. Just ignore any reviews older than 6 months. They did hardware revs to fix all the issues. Sure, right. Mandatory mods, slow, blah, 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 garbage firmware. So there's a whole bunch of them oh yeah, just replace all the firmware on it and you're good. Out-of-box experience takes the second market leader. The Prusa ones are 10 to 12-hour builds. Just take it out of the box and 12 hours later you build it and it's done. So all of these are ways to make a bad 3D printer, and I'm just going to give you one secret to make a good 3D printer. Don't make a bad 3D printer. And so this is a surprisingly uncommon concept, to make a printer that is a tool rather than a printer that is a project. And anything is a project if you try hard and believe in yourself. Here was my post to Reddit a little while after I got the thing saying, hey, does anybody have a application processor board for this thing? I wanted to desolder the flash on it. And somebody DMs me and says, well, here you go. Here's a secret link. Turns out I wasn't the first one to get code exec on the Bamboo X1. 3D printer owners, man. So finishing up the round of context here is what is X1Plus? X1Plus is a custom for about a year later. X1Plus is a custom firmware build for X1 Carbon. It's open source to the extent that it can be. It has a handful of stuff that I'm not going to read through, but here you go. You can have custom LAN access settings. The bed leveling screen is actually really kind of nice. Like it collects these data, but it won't tell you. And so here you go. And I thought I had another one there. Oh, well. So here's the actual meat of what I want to tell you about. Sort of. We do 3-axis printing, and I couldn't figure out how to have 3 talks in one, so this is a 2-axis talk. On one axis, we have basically these 3 sub-talks. Getting root, like kind of IoT classics, right? Like, what do we actually do to build up this weird custom firmware? And a odd story around how it came to be. And on the other axis, I have, well, kind of 4 themes that run through this. Vendors, hacks, drama, and hope. And so, oh, I thought I had arrows pointing to that stuff. Okay. Oh, there we go. Cool. Look at that. So here's thing 1. Thing 1 that I want you to remember is vendors never change. As long as there are vendors out there, they will be doing shenanigans. Thing 2 I would want you to remember is, and use as a theme to guide you here, is it's amazing what you can do if you decide to believe in what's possible rather than believing in what's impossible. Drama always happens. Better to roll with it if you can. And a kind of hopeful message to finish up Supercon this year. The future could be better than the past. And so these 4 things, they will just light up and come and go as I want you to remember various things. So without further ado, a tour of shenanigans. Getting root, IoT classics of the genre. And so this machine inside, by the way, it's just a Linux machine inside. And one of the interesting things here, I'm about to kind of start ruthlessly dunking on Bamboo. And I actually have quite a bit of respect for Bamboo Labs engineering. Like, each of the things that you're about to hear about is a trade-off. It was the result of a trade-off. It was either conscious or unconscious. And so if you are building an IoT thing or anything thing, and you're like, stupid Bamboo, that, like, this couldn't happen to me, my assignment to you is to think critically as to how did this happen structurally? Like, what is the structural issue that led to this? And is your organization set up to avoid this? And because we're all humans, the corollary of this is people are going to be busticating on IoT devices for frickin' ever, right? Like, nobody is going to make secure IoT devices because we're all humans and this process thing is not really great. We're just not good at it as a species. So I have 3.5 exploits to talk to you about. Starting from 0, we have, so Bamboo Firmware, this thing comes out into the world. This is a little bit before my time. It looks like a Linux machine as far as anybody can tell. And so you can point at it and you can say, you can see what it's talking about to the network, and it goes and does something over HTTPS. And that's all encrypted, so you can't really see squat. The slicer will talk to it somehow using some kind of proprietary protocol, but at least we have the slicer binaries on our desktop, so we can reverse engineer that a little bit. And we know that the slicer can trigger prints on the printer. We know the slicer can watch the printer's chamber monitoring camera. We know it can download time lapses. And we have that locally, and it has this weird TUTK IOTC API, whatever the hell that is. Hey, we're in luck. Hey, fantastic. If you just search the internet for it, you get these documents marked confidential through TechCo. They're right on the internet there. How nice. It turns out that this ThruTech thing is a popular Chinese ecosystem IoT abstraction layer. And okay, this makes sense, right? Why do it yourself when you can buy it, right? Their core competency is to go make 3D printers, not to make IoT things. So buying this API makes total sense. And this API actually has a bunch of endpoints built in. An endpoint that they turned off is listing files on the system, but downloading files you can do. And that makes sense, right? Because you'll want to download the file, timelapse 2022 whatever .mp4. That's how you get it off the SD card. You don't want to have to walk over to the SD card. Other files that you might want to consider downloading are //Etsy/shadow. But that's great, except for the fact that there's no SSHD running. So what are you going to do with your Etsy shadow? That's not doing you any good. But okay, sure, fine. If you go looking at what's in a Rockchip firmware and what the init scripts look like you could grab the syslogd, right? You could grab the syslogd configuration, and then you could figure out where the log files are. And then you could grab some log files. And then once you know the names of some binaries on the system, you could download some binaries. This is our first time seeing unencrypted binaries from the system. And, okay, time to fire up Ghidra. Right, like this is going to be the theme here. Like when in doubt, we're just going to fire up a decompiler and get to work. And so the core thing that happens here is that we've bootstrapped downloading a firmware image, right? We know where we've dug through the upgrade binary. We know what endpoints it's hitting. We can now emulate that. We can pretend to be a printer. And also their upgrade binary or their upgrade engine decrypts it. And so luckily we can decrypt it ourselves once we download a firmware image. And also, the firmware image has a static key for the entire product family. So once we have the firmware image that we can decrypt once, we can decrypt it forever. So that's good news. We can now we can keep downloading new versions of firmware and disassembling new versions of firmware, which is good because that bug was patched like pretty darn quick. But credit, by the way, this was before my time hacking on X1s, and so Doridian is fantastic. They did a lot of early work on this. But okay, so that bug is patched, and what are we going to do? Well, let's ask a little differently. The good news is, once we were disassembling the security service, it had a button in there. You can just send it a command. You can just ask very nicely to turn on SSH, if you don't mind. And the only problem is you have to provide it with a key. The key is, it was verified against some devices that they store in /config/keys. Well, actually, it's a HMAC, so if we get the keys, we can, it's not asymmetrically signed, right? If we get the message, we can compute it ourselves. It's not only Bamboo can compute this. So we need to get access to the keys, and then we can just ask nicely, right? So we can still download files. We know that. We still can, they've patched this thing where we can download whatever we want. And we have time lapses still. We know you still have to be able to get those. So what if we try something a little different? Well, we can put whatever file system we want on the SD card, right? Like we control that. And so we could put Next4 there. And I don't know, what are we going to put on this SD card? Symlinks. What a good idea. We can take some symlinks and we can symlink to the key files. And so now the really nice thing that's happened here is we now have anybody who can create a SD card with this magic thing on it, can download their keys, can unlock their printer. So now we have 10 hackers playing with this, not just one. And right, they closed this by removing the ability to mount X4. And they also, I should say, they closed this later. They took these keys and they moved these to trust zone storage. Sort of closed it. We'll talk about that in a moment. So the last question is, if we're going to have, okay, we need one more exploit, basically. And so we still need one way to either take something from the printer or put something on the printer. How do we put something on the printer? The sliced 3D files, they're these 3MF files. And it turns out that those are just zip files that they unpack without any validation to /user data. Which, okay, like user data, that should be sanitized data. Nah, everything else on the system goes in /user data. That's the entire read-write partition for the thing. And so one problem, of course, is if they're littering stuff all over the place in /user data, then like the upgrade agent, it's putting its temporary files. It's the only persistent storage it has. It puts that in /user data. What do you got to do? You got to clean that up on every boot. And so somewhere in there, they have the great idea of we are going to clean up /user data on boot. And if I were implementing this, I would maybe consider using the remove function. If they were implementing this, they might consider printing a buffer to a string and passing it to the shell for some reason. So if I could drop a file named, if I could just have the shell do some, if they pass that directly to the shell, then they're asking the shell to run this for me, right? And so this shell expansion turns right into, it goes ahead and that bracket PWD thing there, by the way, is because I can't put a slash in there. That would be part of a file name. But this is a file name, and so the shell will expand that to a slash, and so there you go. Okay, it'll run our launcher. And so, like, obviously that gets patched too, and it's kind of this cat and mouse game that goes back and forth. And there's this really interesting question at this point of, like, is it patched for reasons that we know? Like, do we have a mole? Like, it's time to start getting a little bit scared here. And I'll stop there, just like on the train of exploits. But these are all really kind of classic IoT exploits, right? But I want to do like a little bit of root cause corrective action here. And like some of these are egregious errors, right? Some of these are we talk about defense in depth, and some of these are insecurity in depth. In as much as it took like it took a chain of exploits to really blow this thing open. And like if they had not made the mistake of letting us mount it X4, right, then it would not have happened. It would not have been possible to do this. And so kind of things that you're probably like, how do we correct this, right? I think the big question is the transition of moving from prototype to release, right? Obviously, they were building something quickly. They were putting something together as quickly as they could, and they needed something that could go, like somebody's user data folder filled up in development, and they went, oh shit, we got to go clean that up. And it's all well and good except for the fact that sooner or later you have to release a product. And that also applies to your vendors, right? The ThruTech folks had to sooner or later release a product also. And so one critical worst case vulnerability, these happen, but like the common thing is that lots of stuff adds up. And so it's not actually obvious to me how to avoid this other than like assume that you're doing something, that all of your prototype code is production worthy. Assume that all of your prototype code needs to be thrown away. This is an honest question, and is kind of part of my thesis of anytime you write something, humans are not really in a position, humans that have to ship something are not going to make something secure. But even if you do everything right, sometimes you just get completely hosed. Super Bowl Sunday, I was in the car. A friend of mine was driving me up to the city. We were going to go watch the Super Bowl with some friends, and I get a message on IRC. Hi, I dumped the mask ROM of the RV1126, the CPU, looking for bugs. I didn't find any bugs that can't be worked around in an OTA update and a version fuse blow. However, there are a few bugs that I think will lead to code exec on the X1 Carbon. Can you send me a copy of the secure header and the binary? I could dump it if I would desolder the eMMC, but I'd rather not. That's like an interesting lead-off message to somebody, right? Like you just message somebody random on IRC and say, I have a boot ROM vulnerability. Sure, fine. Okay. I send him, I'm on my phone, I SSH home, I happen to have the files that he wants. I SCP them somewhere that he can get to them. An hour later, he messages me and goes, hell yeah, the exploit works. Right? Like, what do you do with that? Right? Like, when your CPU vendor screws you like that, what do you do? Anyway. Oh, by the way, this is, I should note that this, on the X1, this isn't patchable at all. Also, it's trust zone level code exec. You can read the keys out of replay resistant memory. It's over on the X1. The P1 is a different architecture entirely. So, okay, I'm going to change gears. What's in a custom firmware? Until now, we actually haven't talked about anything unusual at all. It's really tempting to go like lol Chinese IoT security, but this is not a case of chabuduo, which is Chinese for good enough or close enough. Like jailbreaking is a long tradition, and in terms of iPhone, Android, like more new platforms get jailbroken than mature platforms. This is a new platform. Why isn't this happening to U.S. platforms? Well, how many new platforms has the U.S. launched in recent memory versus Shenzhen? So the only unusual thing is like these specifics is that we got to actually talk about the exploits. Things get a little more unusual because I didn't want to throw something over the wall. I wanted to make something that I could be proud-ish of. So again, there's a bunch of cool stuff that I did, and I'm probably going to skip some of it for time, but I wanted to pick kind of the three most exciting and bizarre things as almost like Hackaday pearls or something like that, Supercon pearls. So first thing first, everybody needs a custom firmware in order to be cool. And beyond that, like, it would be nice that the kernel that they give us, every custom firmware needs a custom kernel to be cool. The kernel that they give us doesn't have a loopback block device. The stock kernel that they give us doesn't have a modern Wi-Fi driver. Some people want WireGuard. Some people we would like SquashFS. It would be nice to have other file systems. It would be nice to have USB Ethernet. It would be actually extremely nice to have USB Ethernet. All these sorts of things you can't do with the kernel that's on there, but we're only starting with running as root and user space. And here's kind of a beginning of thinking about what's possible here, is Linux has a kexec button, right? You can boot from one kernel into another kernel, but it can't be built as a module, and they didn't give it to us. The good news is that there's this guy on the internet who shoehorned kexec into being a module. The bad news is that's ARM64, and that's an ARM32 machine. The really bad news is that there isn't a platform driver to reinitialize everything. And the good news is I believe in myself. And so if there's one takeaway from this slide, it's like, okay, like just decide to do it, right? And so, oops, what happened? Oh, I'm holding it upside down. So here we are, right? And like this is not worth reading at this time, but if you want to link to some of this particular shenanigan, it's right there. And so the boot flow of X1Plus is that we load, we're running in their user land. We look up a patch device tree and we load a module, and we send it and we load our custom kernel into RAM. And we now load our kexec module, we jump into kexec, this is that thing that I showed you just a slide ago, which is like we very carefully by hand shut down every peripheral on the system to keep it from going bonkers. And then we reboot the machine into the new kernel. And okay, this is sort of bonkers, but it's not like we had any other option. Also, by the way, I guess I should note the other thing here is that the thing that we do on boot is they have one read-only-ish file system that they sometimes write or remount read-write and start scribbling keys to, and then remount read-only and walk away. Don't do that. Like, if you have a read-only file system, make it read-only, right? You want to be able to verify your boot tree. And so we did this. I think we improved on this. We did this with an overlay file system. Anyway, another little pearl. We need to patch the UI somehow. How are we going to do this? Here's this gigantic screen binary. We run it through strings. It spits out a whole bunch of JavaScript, and the symbols look like they're Qt. What in the hell is this? Anybody had the misfortune of working with this? Qt's QML it's just this unholy JavaScript-like thing with custom syntax extensions and custom evaluation semantics, homebrew by Nokia with like these weird bindings to Qt C++. Like this thing is just absolutely, if you have the misfortune of using this, I'm sorry. This is not the psychotic part. So, okay, the resource bundle is part of the binary. We can tell because it's 5 fucking megabytes. How are we going to extract it? How are we going to modify it? Well, good news is that all of the resource bundles are loaded with one function, right? And it's dynamically linked, so we can find call sites to that by running objdump and grep, I guess. This is starting to get to be the ugly part. But if we have the call sites and it's all just ARM or ARM byte code or ARM machine code, how are we going to get addresses to data out of it? Well, anybody know what Unicorn Engine is? It is a machine code emulation framework. It's a port of QEMU. It's a port of QEMU's processor emulation, and you can run little chunks of a user space binary, and you can control little chunks of. This is an incredibly useful tool to have in your reverse engineering toolkit. You can. And you can control it by Python. You can say, please run the following instructions and tell me what comes out of the registers at the other end of it. It is beyond useful. And so what we do is we just run a couple of instructions right before the register resource site, and we wait until it gets called, and then we read the registers. And like, this is the sort of thing of like, again, if you believe in what's impossible, you're in a bad situation. If you believe in what's possible, you're in a good situation. Okay, so we extract it somehow. Well, I think it would be bad if we checked their UI into Git. That's all their code, not mine. Like that's a copyright infringement claim waiting to happen. Okay, so we're going to do this hellish thing in which we check in patches. Gross, okay. And sure, as long as we're at it, right, as long as we're patching their thing, then we can, I can just overwrite their register resource call data, or register resource data call, and then I can replace it with my data. So that's great. So here, I guess that's the other part of this Perl is you can use LD preload for anything. If you want to overwrite various functions in somebody else's binary, if you want to overwrite backlight behavior, you can override their call to opening the backlight file. If you want to inject methods into a QML implementation, you can do that. It's right there. If you want to add a VNC server in the middle of Qt, you can do that. All these sorts of things is all things that you can do once you have code injection to somebody's binary. And this is the tool that I recommend thinking about for this. And there's code. The code for this is all on GitHub. Final little micro Perl here. This is, if you're thinking this sounds disgusting and unpleasant, you are correct. Writing embedded software for a platform that you don't have the source for is deeply unpleasant. And the only thing worse than this is writing something for a host. Writing something for Windows and Mac and Linux to get something that's actually decent and reasonable. So I'm going to give you the cheat code. I spend my life in Ghidra. I spend my life sitting there reverse engineering things. Here, this is the Ghidra logo, for those of you that do not know. Electron. The answer is write another one of those goddamn web apps in a box. I really don't like Electron. I really don't like, the previous speaker on this stage said they liked Node.js. I really, oh, God, no. But if you can't beat them, join them. Okay. So those are relatively common techniques for binary injection. The unusual part of the previous bit is, again, not the exact mechanics of what we did, but that I get to tell you about it. Right? You think of the iPhone dev team world where people can't really tell you about how they patch things because then Apple is going to go make their life more difficult. So the unusual part is that we talk about our exploits, and the bit that comes next is a much more human story. So it's not really that psychotic, but it's unusual. Anyway, 10 minutes. All right, I'll hurry up. I think I can do this in 10 minutes. Anyway, at some point we got to get this thing into the world. We have exploits being closed, and the question is, like, do we have a mole somewhere? Like the world needs it, and like even if we didn't have a mole, even if we weren't fighting against time, then the world deserves to have this thing. Like people ought to have custom firmware for the printers that they own. So we want to make it happen. How does it happen in 2024? We get YouTubers to do stuff for us. Like how do you, I don't understand how nobody reads blogs anymore, and that makes me sad. People read Hackaday, I guess that's why we're all here, right? But nobody reads blogs other than that, apparently. And so we have to get YouTubers to do publicity for us. Okay, so here's the plan. We're going to get some YouTubers excited. We're going to force Bamboo to put up with it because otherwise it's going to be just like a big own goal for them, like a PR disaster for them of them shutting down the open source world. And we're going to be too big to fail. And on a couple of axes, as I will discuss in a moment, this is an astonishingly bad idea. So let's get some YouTubers excited. Maybe not that kind of excited. These were actually, so Grant kind of like casually dropped that like he had decrypted or that we had decrypted the logs in a live stream, so that those were not quite contemporaneous, but you get the idea. And like now that YouTube man is out in the world there, like the internet is happening to us, right? Like, okay, we have these breathless comments on Reddit saying like, of course they're breaking open source licensing. Does anyone think they wrote a firmware like that from scratch? Oh, it's what I expected they're doing. They're stealing all our print info, right? And to be clear, Bamboo is not the only target of the Reddit mob. Some Reddit big brain genius says it is impossible that we were not redistributing any Bamboo Lab IP. Let me tell you, we spent a lot of time not doing that. So one quick digression then is for why this is such a bad idea. Can anybody tell me what this says? Mianzi. My Chinese pronunciation is very bad, but which is roughly face. This is, save face, right. And so this is roughly a cultural impedance mismatch that happened here. I grew up in the Northeast as like a Northeast Jew. If I tell you you fucked up, that's a sign of respect from me to you. I care enough about you to tell you that you have fucked up. If I do this in public in China, there's no working with me ever again. The reputation is everything, and so the concept of me sending Florida man from YouTube against these folks, it's kind of all over, right? So what happens next is obviously Bamboo Lab goes on the defensive, right? And they go like, okay, a video went out, serious allegations were released, right? And so then they post a hostile article, they patch everything in sight, they pull all their previous firmware updates. This means war. Plan B. I guess we'd better hurry the hell up. Over Christmas, we say, great, we are going to launch whatever you do. Do not update your printer. We have an exploit against this version. Whatever you do, don't upgrade. And we think, it's December 25th. Can we release over Chinese New Year? They'll all be gone, right? We can get a whole install base full of folks. Well, they can't do anything to close it. Can anybody tell me from my previous slide, a couple of slides ago, whether this would be a good idea? Obviously, more YouTubers are going to solve our problem. That's going to be a great plan. We get early access to Michael Law's Teaching Tech and Joel Telling 3D Printing Nerd. I am indebted to both of them. And it turns out that YouTubers are actually a lot smarter than we are. They have a better PR sense than we do. And they're better connected. And so Joel sends some mail introducing us to some Bamboo folks. And Michael sends us some mail introducing us to the CEO of Bamboo, saying, actually, they're good guys. And there's this all-out panic, as far as we can tell, inside of Bamboo over this. And inside the X1Plus team. And so I send some mail to Dr. Tao. And shockingly, I get on a Zoom call with him. And he and I get to bond over this Florida man YouTuber, making both of our lives very difficult. And so 9 days later in total, we have this joint blog post with Bamboo saying we're going to have a mechanism to unlock the firmware on the printer. Both parties have agreed. And there's this mad scramble, and there's this initial unlockable firmware, in February now at this point. This time frame is incredible, by the way. And they send it to us, and 2 days later is Super Bowl Sunday, and my friend Balash sends the mail saying that your boot security is completely gone. And a month later, so anyway, yes, right, their comment. Thank you for bringing Balash and his findings to our attention. The fact that Balash managed to execute code in the trust zone context and access the contents of secure OTP via USB connection is impressive and concerning. Hope there is a solution to patch it. Frowny face. Okay, closing quick thoughts. I've been doing this for a long time, like 15 years now. I've been hacking on little ARM devices. Originally HTC Evo and HTC Incredible. Here's the unusual part of this story. It doesn't ever happen that a vendor goes, okay, cool, you got it, and lets you hack your own stuff. It is always a long, protracted battle. The unusual part is that I'm getting to tell you that this happened, and that I can talk about the exploits rather than having to be secretive in the iPhone world. What happens if you win? You get more work to do. Great news, there's a new printer coming. I love it. I absolutely love it. Hey, we've come up with, this launched, I'm holding it upside down. This launched Friday night, Saturday morning, and adds Ethernet to your printer. So please go buy it on Crowd Supply. Closing thoughts. Vendors are always going to be vendors. Time to market wins no matter how good you are, really. If you believe in yourself hard enough, you can get a lot of stuff done. I think about like a lot of cases of, I was writing Swift UI stuff recently, and it felt like they painted themselves into a corner with the type system. And at some point, every time they painted themselves into the corner, they're like, well, better get out the jackhammer and bust open the wall. And so like every time you find yourself painted into a corner, I give you permission to break out the jackhammer and believe in what's possible. And the weird closing thought is that more than zero vendors understand that we don't have to be fighting all the time. The future could be better than the past. And if not, a Hungarian dude will show up on Super Bowl Sunday with a boot ROM exploit. Thank you.